occupational therapist. And so that's what I decided to be. I said, Jill, I go all over the world giving speeches about career education and, you know, being thoughtful about identifying your career and matching your interest up. And I can hardly believe that. Barbara said quite dryly, I think you were off in China while she was having to make that decision giving a speech. And that probably was really true. But Barbara was a great elementary and middle school teacher. She sees kids every time we go somewhere that she's taught. But she really allowed me to be the state director that I became. When I was in administration at the area Votech School, the relationship between higher ed and vocational technical education was awful, almost non-existent. And we would go to meetings where Dr. Dunlap and Dr. Tuttle were in attendance. And you could just tell the friction. The sparks would almost be evident. Back in the late 60s, the higher ed and vocational technical education systems literally went to court against one another. The friction was so bad over jurisdictions. Even when I was at Moore Norman Votech, the frictions were there. When I first went to Canadian Valley as superintendent, our secretarial instructor came in and said that for Secretary's Day, she'd like to invite the secretaries in town to come out to the school and do a seminar and serve them lunch, charge a little registration fee, and would that be okay? And I said, well, yeah, it sounds great to me. I said, don't they have a secretarial program over at the junior college, Del Reno Junior College? She said, well, yes, as a matter of fact, they do. I said, why don't we co-sponsor it with the junior college and have them come here in the morning, have lunch, and then go out to the junior college in the afternoon? She kind of looked at me. Honestly, I didn't think all that much about it. Well, they produced a little brochure with the announcement of the seminar on it. One day I was about to go to Lions Club and picked up a stack of them and distributed them at the Lions Club meeting. I don't remember what the program was supposed to be that day, but it turned out to be the revelation that that Votech and higher ed were co-sponsoring something, and that they literally had both institutions' names on the same piece of paper together in a positive way. And I always have kind of thought that was a pretty silly story, and what a shame. So when I came here, I decided to try to do something about that. Dr. Tuttle was frustrated with it. He was a peacemaker. He was not someone who liked to fight, and he always wished it could be different. And I have to admit, the first year or two, it was a challenge. But the chancellor would occasionally talk. I would almost always, in fact, I think I'd say I always made the overture to set the meeting up and to follow through from the meeting. And the legislature, Senator Shedrick and others, created a post-secondary oversight council, which really caused us to have to talk and go to meetings. And the first appointment of the 7 post-secondary oversight council members was done by Dr. Leone, the chancellor, making a list of people acceptable to him, and I made a list of people acceptable to me, and we each then got to line through one on one on his list and he one on my list until the last 7 people were left. And that became then the Post-Secondary Oversight Council, sort of like selecting a referee for the state finals basketball game. And it was hard. It was, that little group met quarterly, and the conversation was very, very forced. But in 1987, we created a concept called the Cooperative Enrollment Agreement and presented that to the Post-Secondary Oversight Council. And I hope, like a lot of things that we've done, it made a lot of sense that adults who were taking classes at area Votech schools could be given college credit for the work that they did at the Votech school by the community college or technical institute. And we began those just one at a time until Dr. Leone left office suddenly, and Dan Hobbs was named interim chancellor. And Dan Hobbs was a collaborator and a peacemaker. And I think he called me in this time and said, "Roy, they're going to take almost a year to pick a new chancellor. And by the time the new chancellor gets here, let's have so many good things going between us that whoever they hire will want to continue it." And boy, did we ever make hay that year. And it's been great. Hans Brisch came in. He was a collaborator. I liked him, and he liked me, and people could tell that. I called Hans after he was named chancellor and told him I wanted to meet with him the next time he came to Oklahoma. He was coming from Nebraska. And so we met for lunch at the faculty house, a place where a lot of legislators have lunch, and you see a lot of lobbyists and so forth. Again, I didn't think all that much about the significance of that, but people would come by and stop at our table in absolute awe that the chancellor and the state director were having lunch, laughing, seeming to enjoy each other's company. And so we began to make a habit of that, and for a number of years, Chancellor and State Superintendent and I would have lunch together before the State of the State address, and then go to the opening session of the legislature and sit together. And early on, that was quite a topic of conversation. Now people don't think all that much about it. One of the fun parts of this job has been hosting visitors from other states and other countries over the years. One of the first social events that Barbara and I hosted in our home, I went home one night and said, "Barbara, would we be able to have some folks over for dinner Friday night?" And she said, "Well, yes, I think so." She said, "How many were you thinking of?" And I said, 38, but 4 of them will be able to speak English. The rest of them are Chinese. And so we did, and over the years we've hosted lots of groups in, and it's been lots of fun. The reason they come to Oklahoma, though, is that we do have a very, very special system. We have a separate state board for Votech, 13 members. State superintendent is the chair of the board. Most state directors work for the state superintendent, and they're an assistant state superintendent or a director under an assistant state superintendent. And in our case, we have this freestanding state agency with this separate board. And I brag to my counterparts that we have the best informed state superintendent in the country on issues relating to voc ed, because she, Sandy Garrett now, sits as our board chair. What it has allowed us to do, though, is to focus on Votech. My counterpart in Kansas goes to work every day in the Department of Education in Kansas, and her relationships are with people in in elementary, secondary education. And she puts her day in that environment. My counterpart in Colorado works in higher ed, and he puts his day in around people dealing with higher education issues. When I come to work in the morning, I come to work to think about and talk about and do vocational technical education. This is a very, very specialized field. It's a field that's hard to do. It's more expensive. It's it has nuances that people from outside the field just don't see and don't understand. If you go to the legislature and you don't come from the field of vocational technical education in this job, you just can't be successful. Back in the early teaching days, I remember Don Kellogg was our wrestling coach at U.S. Grant. Often had state championship wrestling teams. Norman High School was a big competitor. Bert Core was a wrestling coach. Bert went on to become superintendent at Poto, still is Superintendent Poto, one of the great superintendents in the state. But I asked Bert one day at a wrestling tournament, I said, you know, you and Kellogg are fierce competitors, and sometimes Kellogg beats you, you know, Kellogg's kid will beat one of your kids, but more often I see one of your kids beating one of Kellogg's kids. Well, Bert was a champion wrestler from Perry, back in the days of Perry's great wrestling team. And Bert said, you know, Don never wrestled. He studied wrestling, and he knows the technique, and he knows, he technically knows the sport. But I've wrestled, and I know how to teach wrestling because I've been a wrestler. And I think that's the way vocational technical education is. I've been there. I've been a student of vocational education, a teacher of vocational education, local administrator. And I think it's allowed me to have an understanding of our field that's allowed our system to move forward. Well, my vision is for us to continue to move forward. Society has changed so dramatically. The workplace has changed so dramatically. And we can't continue to offer even the same kinds of vocational technical programs that we've historically offered and continue to be successful. And it's going to cause some major heartburn in our field because many of our traditions are going to be challenged. A student who graduates from high school today has to plan on going to school 13 and 14 years as opposed to just 12. That student has to be better prepared academically. But in addition to that, our program has to be at the technical level to allow that student to be able to compete in the marketplace. Our economy is going to demand that somebody do that job well. We've got to have in Oklahoma a really well-educated, well-schooled, technically competent worker coming out of our school system. And if we in vocational technical education choose not to do that, choose not to step up and be that supplier, then our history will be very, very dismal. We've got the people to do it. We have the finest pool of talented people in vocational technical education in this state ever assembled. The state staff is second to none. The leadership at the state level is second to none. The leadership at the local level, our locally elected boards are absolutely the model in the country. The financing structure is sound. Our ability to raise taxes locally and our state and federal supports there. What we have to do is to recognize the importance of our tradition and certainly respect our history, but to focus in on the future and focus in on where we have to redirect our resources in order to supply the skilled worker that the country and our state needs. The awards are really for the system of vocational education. I just happen to be the recipient. I think the most fun, and I mean that in a very professional way, recognition though was when I was named to be the first cabinet secretary in the first governor's cabinet as cabinet secretary for vocational technical education. The story behind that is, and by the way, I have a very nice certificate, big certificate, naming me as cabinet secretary. George Nye was lieutenant governor when I was national president of FBLA when I was in high school. George was our commencement speaker at ELEC, and I worked in his campaigns, and was governor when I was hired by the board as state director. And he had to bless my appointment, so to speak. But that first summer that I was director, the Department of Commerce had organized a trade mission to China. And Governor Nye was to go on the trade mission. And back then, the legislature could go well into August. And the legislature didn't adjourn when we thought they were going to. And so the governor told the dozen or so of us that were to be on the trade mission to go ahead, and that as soon as the legislature adjourned, he would catch up to us. So as it turned out, we went on into China and did our work there, and came out for the weekend to Hong Kong. And the governor had sent word that a couple of us should pick him up at the Hong Kong airport that Saturday evening. Well, he got off the plane, and we greeted him, and he was just as excited as a kid with a new toy. And so we got in the car, and he and I were in the back seat, and I said, "How'd the legislative session end up?" And he said, "Great." He said, "I got my authority to establish the governor's cabinet passed." And so he was chattering on about that. And I said, before we got to the hotel, I said, "What are you going to do about a cabinet secretary for education?" He said, "Well, I've been thinking about that, and I've decided to name the chancellor as the secretary of higher ed. And since the state superintendent's chairman of your board, I decided to name the state superintendent the chairman or the secretary, cabinet secretary for elementary, secondary, and vocational education." And I said, "Governor, you can't do that. That puts us in a second place position, and you can't do it." And he said, "Well, I don't have a choice. That's what I have to do." Well, unfortunately for him, the trip was literally an around-the-world trip that lasted about 10 more days. And the poor guy never had a waking moment without me beating on him about that decision. So when he came back, he held a press conference to announce his education secretaries, and announced that the chancellor would be the secretary of higher ed, the state superintendent would be the secretary of elementary secondary education, and that Roy Peters would be the secretary of vocational technical education. Now, the truth is, I don't think we ever met as a cabinet. I think we met one time maybe to get our pictures taken as a group, but I always thought it was a pretty important statement for vocational technical education. To be named AVA Educator of the Year was really an honor. It's quite a process to go through to get there, and I felt it was very, very competitive, and the people who were on stage with me were all winners. I mean, they were just superb educators. But the importance to me was that it was a recognition from the vocational education family as opposed to outside. And I think the people who made the decision knew me well and knew the candidates, other candidates well. And I just felt very honored to have been selected.
Okay.
Something I'm really very, very proud of is having had the opportunity to serve on so many boards and commissions, particularly with industry groups. And that's so important for us in vocational education, and it's helped us, I think, have a better understanding of the business mind, of how business is thinking. And just this morning I resigned from the chair of the National Association of Automotive Technical Foundation board, which is a prestigious national board that credits our automotive programs. And I hated to do that because that's been a great joy. You sit at the table with some of the finest people in the automotive field, and that's just been good, I think, for Votech. Probably the most interesting board I've had the opportunity to sit on is the Automotive Youth Education System Board. We meet in Detroit, and we meet in some very historic settings. Last year we were at the Dodge Mansion, one of the Dodge brothers from the Dodge car fame mansions. This year we met in the Chrysler Tower at the boardroom. And the board's a fairly small board. The chairman of General Motors, Jack Smith, the chairman of Chrysler, Bob Eaton, the president of Toyota USA, the executive director, president, I guess, of the National Automobile Dealers Association, former governor of Maine, who's really a neat guy, Jock McKernan, and a couple of others and I are on that board. And to have the opportunity to sit at the same table and talk about issues affecting vocational technical education with people of the caliber of those CEOs and board chairs is really neat. And I can remember the reading about people of that stature. But they have great respect for what we do in vocational technical education in Oklahoma, and I just have had the right seat to be able to represent Oklahoma. When I was thinking about whether or not to pursue coming to Stillwater to join the State Department, one of the things that I thought a lot about was my ability to work in an important way in the Stillwater community. In El Reno, I had been in everything and president of most everything. And I liked that. I liked we started a YMCA and did all kinds of things. And I remember talking to Leo Presley about it. And he said, I think you'll find as state director that you'll have plenty of opportunities to serve. My first opportunity to serve was Stillwater City Commission created a new Visitors and Special Events Bureau. And they asked me to serve on it, and the first meeting I was elected chair. And the purpose of the Visitors and Special Events Bureau was to bring conventions and conferences to Stillwater. During my term of office, we announced that we were moving the annual August conference from Stillwater to Tulsa. I was perhaps not the most popular chair of the Visitors and Special Events Bureau because that conference was a big event in this community. But somehow I survived it and ended up serving on the chamber board for a number of years and chaired the Stillwater Industrial Foundation, which was a wonderful experience to sit at that table and see the importance of VOTEC in attracting industry. And we, that period of time, we brought the Armstrong plant to Stillwater, and that was very, very important. I then got involved in the United Way and loved it. A lot of people don't like to raise money and ask people for money, but I just find it important to ask people because people want to be contributors to worthy causes. And we, here at our department, raised a record amount of money the year I was the campaign chair here. And I went on then to become chairman of the United Way Board. In 1992, the mayor asked me to serve on the Stillwater Medical Center Board. And I was pretty well loaded up at the time with boards and asked for a little bit of time. And we actually got a law passed through the legislature that allowed me to designate my representative to the Teachers Retirement Board, which freed me up then to appoint someone to that board, which I still do, and then serve on the medical center. I thought when I agreed the hospital was in good shape. A month after I had been on the board, we discovered that the accountants, outside auditors, had not been charging bad loans off properly. There wasn't anything illegal, it was just a technical error. And that instead of being in pretty good shape financially, we were very, very close to broke. Had 3 days cash on hand, which for any business would be a nightmare. And began to make some really big decisions about the future of our medical center.